Next, we will have James Royall and Jared, I apologize, Chasso, if I pronounced it correctly, from the Brooklyn Defender Services.
Well, first, I would like to say that thank you for having me and allowing me to testify on this important issue. My name is James Royall. I'm a reentry advocate at Brooklyn Defender Services, and we provide criminal defense, family defense, immigration, civil legal services, social work support, and tools for self-advocacy in nearly 35,000 cases involving indigent Brooklyn residents every year. As a part of the reentry unit, I provide a comprehensive support for people upon release from prisons or jails and direct advocacy on behalf of our clients while they are incarcerated. I know the meaning of parole release, the heartbreak and devastation of being denied, and the utter joy when it is granted. I also know the hardship of incarceration for families. In fact, I'm also here in behalf of the New Hour in Brentwood, the Nassau County Jail Advocates, Prison Families Anonymous, Universalist Utilitarian Congregation at Shelter Rock, and the Second Chance Reentry. By countless indicators, incarceration throughout the United States, including in New York, is historically and a global anomaly. States, including New York, there are more people under correctional supervision across the country than were in the gulag at its peak in the early 1950s. Until the spread of the mandatory minimum sentencing regimes that developed as a part of the war on drugs in the 1970s and the 1980s, the incarceration rates across the country had remained relatively constant for a long time. Here in New York, the average rate of incarceration was less than 75 incarcerated people per 100,000 people for a century, until it more than quintupled during this period, that decade from the 70s to the 80s. Here in New York State, the stark and persistent racial disparities in incarceration rates and every other aspect of the criminal legal system had led many to call it the new Jim Crow. Notably, incarceration rates for white people did not substantially rise under the new harsher sentencing laws and guidelines. Now, thanks to part of the new drug law enforcement reforms, the current incarceration rate in New York has fallen by a quarter since its peak in 1999, and crimes rates has plummeted. But New York's incarceration rate is still nearly double of that than Maine, and about 3.5 times of that of Germany. To truly roll back mass incarceration, New York must expand parole release for those who have rehabilitated themselves and transformed their lives. It has been said that those that have once been the problem is the ones that's closer to the solution. And even as New York's prison population has gradually declined, the number of incarcerated people aged 50 or older jumped by 46%. So the elderly population has grown as the New York's population overall has declined. These are mostly men and women who have committed serious crimes decades ago, but who have taken the advantage of every opportunity permitted by the difficult carceral environment to turn their lives around and make amends, and want to rejoin the fabric of society, their families. And when I say make amends, it's giving back. It's making sure 10, 12, 20 people don't do the same thing that one person did a long time ago. That's a beneficial process. That's very beneficial for the state of our affairs. That is the order of the day. Yet far too often, New Yorkers, especially older adults, are dying in prison after being denied parole multiple times, including nearly 1,000 such deaths under the current governor. We can and must safely expand parole release, and that is the key. I don't know how that happened. Excuse me. It was mine. I'm sorry. I hope it don't do it again. I hope it was in the snooze. But so, yet far too often, New York's, especially older adults, are dying in prison after being denied parole multiple times, including nearly 1,000 such under the current governor. We can and must safely expand parole release while reinvesting the savings produced by decreased populations in meaningfully supporting crime victims and their families, including those who themselves who may have committed crimes. One of the things about safely expanding parole release and reinvesting them savings, that is definitely my favorite line, the order of the day. When you're able to use individuals that has once have been the problem and they are now the solution, and they have been evaluated. They are not their worst mistake. You know, there's an evaluative process. They have spoke about the risk assessment, but it's not just the risk assessment alone. You know, there's a whole historical background on this individual. They are being groomed. We're not saying let go of individuals that are the mistake they made 20, 30, 40 years ago, even 10 years ago. We're saying evaluate these individuals and let them go if they pass that test. This is how we can bring safety and justice to New York and stop the cycles of trauma and violence. We must come together and work together. John McKenzie, tragic death is a symbolic of a broken parole system that continues to undermine the presumed rehabilitative nature of our criminal legal system. Presumed rehabilitative nature of our criminal legal system. John was an extraordinary person, a Long Island resident who took full responsibility for his serious crime and did everything to make amends. He started a victim awareness program, obtained multiple college degrees, and helped countless young men transform their lives through group therapy and direct mentorship. He would have been a crucial asset to the community if given the chance. In fact, Justice Maria Rosa of the State Supreme Court in Dutchess County held the Parole Board in contempt for refusing to give any justification for denying Mr. McKenzie's release beyond his original crime, after throwing out an earlier denial and ordering a new hearing at which the board's decision was virtually the same. The New York State Parole Risk Assessment Compass had found that 70-year-old John McKenzie posed absolutely no threat to society, but he was still denied parole for the 10th time. A week later, he committed suicide. He hanged himself with a sheet. His adult daughters will never see him free or at all, despite all that he did to make positive changes in so many lives, not only his selves, but so many lives. That is the despair that repeated and unjustifiable parole denials wreak on our loved ones and community members. That is why Brooklyn Defender Services joins with our allies in the parole justice movement to say, bring our elders home. In addition, I applaud Governor Cuomo's executive order giving people on parole the opportunity to vote, which turned the page on a shameful Jim Crow era policy and helped to affirm our state's commitment to democracy. Any rollback of this long overdue reform would be a huge injustice and an embarrassment to our state. The fact that some politicians may have managed to link expand voting rights and alleged public safety threats is, excuse me, let me say that again. The fact that some politicians have managed to link expanded voting rights with alleged public safety threats is reminiscent of the infamous Southern strategy stroking white fear and anger. So I ask, please, can we come together to improve safety and end the injustices of our state without demonizing people, without demonizing us? We need to come together and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. You did make some recommendations in your written testimony and conclusion, a reference to two different bills that I am familiar with, and the composition of the parole board. So I do note that, and that'll be part of the record also. I've got a question. Well, you know what? Let me first say, at the very end, you talked about coming together and working together. I concur, I share that, and I think if we had more of that in public service, we would do much better for our community. So thank you for saying that, and keep talking to your elected officials about that, all of us. I
Okay.
appreciate that. Beyond that, question in two areas. It's pretty interesting to me, and this is among the reasons that I articulated earlier for holding these hearings, specifically with the Parole Board itself. My observation has been that we've got those that might focus on law and order are unhappy with the Parole Board. Those that focus on inmate advocacy are unhappy with the Parole Board. Those that are elected as Republicans seem unhappy, though have expressed unhappiness. Those elected as Democrats have expressed unhappiness, upstate, downstate, east, west. So clearly there's an issue. So I want to ask you about two different areas. Unless you're satisfied that these areas are adequate. The first has to do with transparency of the Parole Board operations, and second has to do with Parole Board accountability. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about either one of them.
Well, I think I can answer both questions just with this one answer. I believe that the standards and the structure, 259I, Executive Order 259I, that's standard, and the risk assessment standard. I believe those are some viable structures. However, it has to be followed. That's the broken part of the parole system for me. For the other side, the broken part is that they are letting individuals go. Some individuals are coming home. However, there's one individual that may be released out of 10 may have, I will call it recidivate. Then there's a big hoopholer about that. Then the other 9 individuals has to suffer for that. So that's a broken part, and they blame that on the Parole Board. No, that's the individual. I don't believe anything is 100%. That's the 1 out of the 10 that they missed. But everybody else shouldn't have to suffer from that. So the tools that's in place should be in place and should be followed.
Okay, thank you for that. Other questions?
I have a question for Mr. Royall. Thank you. And again, I want to echo what Senator Gallivan said, that
Sure.
this is, it really seems to be a broken system, and the only way we're going to fix it is we all work together. So thank you. You used the word presumed rehabilitation, and I carefully listened to you use the word presumed. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the system isn't great when it comes to rehabilitation. Do you have suggestions on how we might legislatively guide the Parole Board or to help that rehabilitation process? Isn't that what our goal is for an individual?
Well, the rehabilitation process, for me, is not a job of the Parole Board.
Right.
It's a job of the prison system.
Well, the prisons.
So I don't believe that there's many structures in place inside the prison system, created by the prison system, that speaks to rehabilitation. On paper, you might see that they have a school in every prison. They may have programs in every prison, and for the paper, it looks good. But individual
In
inside,
reality?
they're not. In reality, of course, is not like that. It's like a basketball team has a beautiful people on their team. It looks like they're gonna win, and they're in last place. So what actually happens when I also spoke about self-rehabilitation, self-advocacy, these individuals, they utilize those programs, they ace those programs, and then they're stuck. There's no more left. When they sit in front of the Parole Board, they speak about all of the incarcerated individuals created programs, or the organizations that have created programs that are viable to society, programs that speaks to recidivism, not programs that just speaks to education, which there is none there. You know, you have two to maybe 3 different types of educational systems in there. You have an adult basic education system, and that's for anybody that's not over, I believe, the 9th or 8th grade reading level. Everybody goes into this one class. Everybody's not on the same level. Then you have the pre-GED and the GED class. Now, and we know what those are about. So I believe they just have to restructure, really look at these things inside of the prison, restructure, because it's presumed from the outside, from society, that a rehabilitation is going on. And that's why individuals are getting released. But they are getting released because of the creative programs, those programs that speaks to the growth, the programs that speaks to the development, the programs that are progressive, that allow them to speak to their transformation, to their paradigm shift, and make the release.
Thank you. I'd like to just mention one thing. It's slightly off topic, but through the Heroin and Opiate Task Force that Senator Fred Akshar, who else is co-chairing, and Senator Jacobs, and there's someone else, but I can't remember, and Senator Amador, thank you. We did public hearings across New York State to listen on how the Senate could get involved and help the epidemic that we have throughout our country. And one of the many things that we heard was in our jail systems, and that it was Sheriff Apple in the Albany County that showed us that if we could invest some state dollars, our taxpayer dollars, into programs in the jail system, the level of recidivism goes down significantly. So I am proud to say here in Nassau County, we were able to give them over $200,000 just a couple weeks ago for exactly that, to help sponsor rehabilitation programs when it comes to drug addiction, so they can capture these individuals so the recidivism rate goes down. So
That's great.
thank you.
That's great.
Well, thank you for your
Yeah.
testimony.
Thank you very
I'd
much.
like to thank everybody for their testimony and their patience, of course. Oral testimony, as I mentioned earlier, will be available immediately on the Senate website from yesterday and today. Ultimately, all the written testimony, the various information request submissions will also be on the Senate website. The written testimony will not be immediate, and the ultimate report that comes out of this and recommendations, again, can be found there. I would like to thank, sir, go right ahead if you have more.
I just have one additional thing I just want to mention. When I was speaking of John McKenzie, that's a serious situation. The individual committed suicide. He's a very progressive individual, very. There's a lot of individuals in there like John McKenzie, and they're going to the board, getting hit 8 times. I know of a fellow named Marvin Lewis. He's a graduate of RTA, rehabilitation through the arts. He has numerous college degrees. He hasn't had an infraction within 30 years. He doesn't have a homicide or anything like that, but he do have involvement, justice involvement with a police officer. The police officer is not opposing his release, yet he's still getting hit. These are the things I'm talking about. You know, this individual is helping individuals inside. He's doing a lot. He's reaching out. And these are the very things, before we, have these individuals killing themselves, we have to look into this stuff, and accountability is a big part of it. What you spoke about, you gave dollars to the prison system, and there has to be accountability somewhere there, because if you're giving it just to the system, somebody in them systems is not doing their job. So it has to be some type of accountability measurement too, some type of barometer for our dollars that's going in there.
That's exactly what I was getting at with the transparency and accountability.
yeah.
So we get to the point of the law's the law currently. You have factors to consider and standards to meet. It's my belief that the board hasn't followed that in all standards, or in all cases, and I think other people share that.
Mm-hmm.
But then beyond that, I don't know that there's any mechanism in place from the executive branch to ensure that they are following the standards. They are independent. However, there should be some sort of check and balance, in my view, that if they're not doing what the law requires, that somebody can address the individual. And it might just simply be training. It might be greater transparency in reporting, that there's more public reporting of their activities that are out there. But that's actually what I was getting at, the point that you made, Nate.
Okay.
And thanks for bringing that up.
All right.
Okay, are you good now?
Yeah.
All right, I am going to turn over in a moment to Senator Phillips, but I just want to remind people about everything. It will be on the website ultimately, and I thank everybody for being here and dealing with these very, in my view, important public policy topics.